The first thing that hit the dirt was Annie Whitmore's face. The second was the terrible truth that she could not get up. The Arizona sun burned into her closed eyes. The hard trail pressed against her cheek. Dust filled her mouth, warm and bitter, sticking to her cracked lips. Her tongue felt thick and useless. Her chest fought for air that would not come, like a pump gone dry. Above her, wings cut slow circles in the sky. A vulture let out a single, harsh call. It was not in a hurry. The desert never hurried. It just watched and waited for people to quit. Annie was 23 years old and she was dying alone on a road no one would come looking down. The desert did not care that she had crossed half a country to reach this place. It did not care that she had sold her mother's locket to pay for passage west. It did not care that she was on her way to marry a man she had never met, just to escape a house where every meal felt like a favor. It cared about heat. It cared about thirst. It cared about how long a body could fight both. She lay in the center of the wagon track like a thrown-out doll. Her dark traveling dress was torn and stiff with sweat and dust. Her chestnut hair had broken loose from its pins and spread around her head, full of grit. One arm stretched out in front of her, fingers curled in the dirt as if she had tried to crawl and her body had simply refused. She had been walking for 3 days. Before that, there had been the stagecoach. She could still see it if she forced her mind to go back. The cracked leather seat, the driver humming some tune, the shotgun guard turning to grin at her, his teeth white in his sunburned face, her own gloved hands folded in her lap, holding tight to her bag with all her plans inside it. She had been thinking of Thomas Brennan. Thomas, the man from Pine Ridge who had written 4 careful letters and 1 plain promise. I can give you a home, not love, not joy. Just a roof, a shared business, and a place that was hers in a world where she had none. That had been enough to pull her out of her uncle's house, away from the biting words and tight smiles, and the feeling of owing more than she could ever repay. Then there had been the sound of hooves. Not one horse, many, fast. The driver had sworn. The guard had twisted around, reaching for his gun. The coach had lurched to a stop as 6 riders came boiling out of a cut in the rocks, bandanas pulled up over their faces, guns already drawn. The first shot hit the driver. Annie saw him jerk, saw his hat fly, saw his body topple sideways. The reins slid out of his hands. The guard fired twice, wild and sudden, and then folded over like someone had cut his strings. Blood soaking through his shirt. Horses screamed. The coach rocked. Annie had thrown herself to the floor and crawled under the bench, pressing into the smallest shadow she could find. She clapped her hands over her ears like a child. It did not matter. The gunshots still slammed through her. The shouts still cut into her. And then there was quiet, so sudden it made her heart pound louder. Hands closed around her ankle and dragged her out into the blazing light. She kicked once, weak and wild. It did nothing. A man yanked her up by the arm so hard her shoulder screamed. Dust swirled. The air smelled like sweat and horses and the sharp metal smell of blood. "Look what we got," a voice said. The man holding her was tall. His eyes were pale blue and cold above his bandana. He tipped her chin up with the barrel of his gun and turned her head, studying her face like he was checking a horse's teeth. "Pretty thing," he said. "Too pretty for this road." "Leave her," another man said. His horse stepped closer. He was older, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. "We're here for money, not more trouble. Law's already sniffing us. We don't need a woman in the bargain." They argued over her, like she was a crate or a sack of flour. She heard words like witness and risk and rope. Her heart banged so loud she thought they must hear it. In the end, they took everything but the dress on her back. They emptied her bag, tore open her trunk, shook her out until the hidden coins sewn into her hem clinked into their hands. Then they swung up on their horses, whooped once, and rode off, leaving her beside a burning coach and 4 dead men, as if that counted as mercy. Smoke climbed into the bright sky, heat from the flames beat at her face. Somewhere in the mess, a horse thrashed and then went still. No one else was moving. No one else was coming. The nearest town was Pine Ridge, 40 miles. She knew because she had traced that route on the map in her uncle's parlor until the paper had worn thin under her finger. So she started walking. The first day, anger and fear shoved her forward. She found a shallow creek by chance. The water was warm and tasted of dirt, but it was wet, and she drank until her stomach cramped. She washed the worst of the blood from her feet, tied her boots back on, and told herself out loud that she would not die. She thought of Thomas Brannan and his neat pen strokes, and the way he had written words like duty and partnership. The second day, the creek had shrunk to a thin line of water. What she scooped into her mouth did not quench anything, it only woke the need louder. Her lips split when she tried to speak. Her head throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Blisters rose on her heels, burst, and bled inside her boots. She cut strips from her petticoat and wrapped her feet, then kept going, because stopping felt like lying down in a grave and pulling the dirt over herself. By the third day, the desert had stripped her down to one thought. One more step. She no longer saw separate rocks and cactus and sky. It all blurred into heat and light and pain. Pine Ridge faded. Thomas faded. Her uncle's house in Philadelphia might as well have been on the moon. The whole world shrank to the place where her feet met the ground. Then her body quit. Her knees buckled without warning. She dropped forward and, this time, did not catch herself. The ground rushed up and hit her hard. Her shoulder slammed into the packed earth. Her cheek scraped along it. Dust puffed up around her and settled in her throat. She tried to push up on her hands. Her arms shook like wet paper. They folded. She collapsed flat and stayed there, every muscle empty. The vulture that had been following her drifted lower. Another joined it. Annie stared at a small stone, inches from her eye. It was smooth and round and looked oddly clean among the rough dirt. She felt something give way inside her, not a sharp break, but a slow, soft surrender. She had survived cholera, taking both parents in the same week. She had survived 6 years as an unwanted guest in a house that never let her forget the cost of her keep. She had survived the guns and the fire and 3 days under this sky. She would not survive a fourth. The desert did not care, but someone else did. Hoofbeats sounded on the packed ground. At first she thought it was her mind making up comfort at the end. The sound came again, steady and sure, getting closer. A shadow slid over her, wide and moving. A horse snorted. Leather creaked. A man's voice, low and rough from too many quiet days, cut through the roar in her ears. "Easy, girl," he said. "You're not gone yet." Hands turned her gently onto her back. The sun stabbed her eyes, then a hat brim blocked it. A face leaned over her, hard and sunburned, with gray eyes narrowed against the light, and a jaw dark with stubble. "You're alive," he said, like he was surprised and relieved at the same time. Barely. An arm slid under her shoulders, lifting her. Cool metal touched her split lips. "Small sips," he said. "Trust me." Water hit her tongue, thin and warm, but still the best thing she had ever tasted. She swallowed once, twice, fighting the wild urge to gulp. The man's hand was steady at her back. "That's it," he said softly. "Stay with me. I've got you. I'm not riding past." The bright world tilted and slid away again, but this time Annie did not fall into the dark alone. The sound of his voice followed her, the feel of his arm under her shoulders holding her up against a desert that had almost taken everything. Annie woke to quiet, to a low ceiling and the smell of coffee instead of smoke and burning horses. Her body felt heavy and sore, each breath a slow pull that reminded her she still lived. A thin blanket lay over her, rough but clean against the travel dress stuck to her skin. Light from a small window painted a bright square on the worn wooden floor. For one long heartbeat, she hoped the desert had been a nightmare, then pain in her neck told her it had not at all. She turned her eyes, not daring to move her head, toward the sound of metal tapping. A man stood near a small iron stove, pouring from a black pot into a tin cup with steady hands. He was tall and lean, with dark hair, a rough jaw, and gray eyes that watched her closely. Dust stained his shirt and pants, but the room around him was swept and neat. He looked like someone who belonged to this hard country and did not expect much kindness from it. "You are still with us," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse, but not unkind. "How long?" Annie whispered, surprised by how dry and broken her words sounded. "Since yesterday afternoon," he answered. "You drifted in and out, and fever tried to take you, but it lost." He crossed the room and held out the cup, saying it was water with a little coffee and honey to coax her along. Her hands shook as she reached for the cup, and his calloused palm slid under hers so the tin did not spill. The warm, sweet drink touched her cracked lips and slid down her throat like kindness, steadying the wild beat of her heart. "My name is Annie Whitmore," she whispered. "Ethan Rowe," he said. "This is my ranch, 6 miles south of where I found you, 40 miles east of Pine Ridge." The town's name struck her hard because that was where her stage had been headed, and where all her plans waited. "I was going there," she said, "to marry Thomas Brennan." Ethan's eyes narrowed a little, like he remembered something sour. He said everyone in Pine Ridge knew Brennan, that he ran the mercantile, kept his shelves neat, his books exact, and his temper close. Annie stared at the blanket as she told him how Brennan had written 4 letters, offered marriage and a place in his store, and paid for her passage west. It had not been romance, only a bargain that promised a roof, steady work, and a life where she was not a burden. When Ethan asked what she had been before that, the answer came slow. Annie told him about Philadelphia, about her parents, little school for poor children, and the pride on a child's face when letters finally made sense. She spoke of cholera taking both parents in 1 week, of debts taking the school, and of her uncle's house where meals came with sharp remarks about charity. She said that by the time Brennan's notice reached their church, even a hard man in a far desert town had sounded like hope. Ethan listened with his hands wrapped around his cup. When she asked about him, his answer was plain. His wife Sarah and their little girl Emma had died of fever in Pine Ridge while he rode for the doctor. This ranch had been his father's, and after the funerals he came here and worked because work hurt less than pity. "I did not stop for you because I am kind," he said. "I stopped because once I was too late, and this time I was not." Later, when her head felt clearer, he said he would ride into Pine Ridge in the morning. He would send Brennan a telegram, tell him she had survived but could not travel, and wait to see the reply. He would also remind the town council that their schoolhouse stood empty since Miss Henderson died, and that he had found a woman who knew how to teach. When he said that work mattered more than folding cloth behind a counter, something small and bright stirred inside her. At dawn he saddled his horse while the sky was still gray. Annie sat at the table in Sarah's shirt and pants, her feet wrapped in fresh bandages, watching him through the open doorway. Ethan set bread and dried meat on the shelf, filled the water bucket, and checked the rifle above the door. He told her to bar that door if she heard riders, and to open it only when she heard his voice, because men who rob stages do not like witnesses. Then he tipped his hat and rode away in a thin cloud of dust. The house felt larger once his hoofbeats faded and dust settled back into the quiet yard. Annie washed the cup, folded the blanket, and walked slow laps to test her unsteady legs. The clock ticked while the sun climbed, and heat pressed against the small adobe walls. Near noon, the air felt close, so she stepped onto the porch and shaded her eyes against the glare. She heard horses on the trail, saw 3 riders, pale blue eyes and a scarred brow, and knew the men from the ruined stagecoach had found her and Ethan Rowe was not there. Annie's hands shook so hard she had to clamp the rifle to her shoulder with all her strength. The 3 riders stopped in a loose line before the porch. The tall man with the pale blue eyes shifted in his saddle, hat tipped back, just enough to see her clearly. The scarred older man sat easy but ready, thumb hooked near his gun. The youngest fidgeted, chewing his lip, eyes jumping between her and the house as if he already wished he were somewhere else. "That's far enough," Annie called. Her voice wobbled once, then steadied. "Say what you came for from there." The tall man smiled, slow and cruel. "We came for you," he said. "We left you by that coach as a kindness. Could have put a bullet in your head. Figured the sun would take you. Then we ride through Pine Ridge and hear a story about some girl who walked out of the desert and landed in a cowboy's bed. That story is bad for us." "You robbed the stage," Annie said. "You killed those men. You left me to die. You don't get to come here and finish it." "You're a witness," the scarred man said. His voice was flat as dry ground. "Witnesses talk. Marshals listen. Ropes get used. We're just cutting the rope before it pulls tight." "I never saw your faces," Annie said. "You wore bandanas. I can't name you to the law." "Marshal won't care," the tall man said. "He'll just see you standing there and me sitting here and decide he likes your side of the story better, and I am not hanging because you didn't die on schedule." He touched his heel to his horse. It took one slow step closer. Annie raised the rifle higher, sighting on his chest. Her shoulder throbbed, her knees shook, but she kept that barrel pointed straight. "You take another step," she said, "and I shoot." He cocked his head. "You ever fired a gun before?" "No," Annie said. "But I've already done one thing you thought I couldn't. I'm still alive." The youngest rider gave a nervous little laugh. "She's shaking," he muttered. "She couldn't hit the side of the barn." "Are you willing to bet your life on that?" Annie asked him. Their eyes met. His laugh died. He looked away. The tall man's smile thinned. "Last chance," he said. "You come with us quiet. We find a place nobody ever stumbles across. You stay. This gets messy for everybody." Annie thought of the driver's easy humming, the guard's grin, the instant they dropped like cut strings. She felt again the burning coach at her back, the 3 days of heat and thirst and pain. She saw Ethan leaning over her in the dust, offering water, his voice steady when everything else was spinning. All her life, other people had chosen for her. Her uncle, aunt, Brennan. These men. The desert. "No," she said. "I'm done letting other people decide how I die." She pulled the trigger. The rifle slammed into her shoulder like a kick. The shot went wide, throwing up a spray of dust at the tall man's stirrup. His horse leapt sideways with a squeal. Before the echo faded, a second shot cracked from beyond the corral. The scarred man's hat jerked and spun into the dust, the brim blown clean off. "The lady told you to stop," Ethan Rowe's voice rang across the yard. "I'd listen if I were you." Annie turned her head. Ethan sat copper on the low rise beyond the corral, rifle snug to his shoulder, face carved hard. His gray eyes were cold now. All the quiet kindness burned down to steel. "3 of you," he called. "One of me with high ground. One woman who's already willing to pull the trigger. You're in the open. I don't miss much." "That's bad math." The scarred man swore under his breath. "Jake," he muttered. "He ain't bluffing." "Shut up, Wes," the tall man snapped, though some of the easy swagger had drained from his voice. He raised it again. "You think this ends because your cowboy rode back, girl?" "It ends when you leave," Annie said. Her voice surprised her. It sounded steady. "Or it ends when the marshal puts you in front of a judge. Either way, I'll still be standing." The youngest shifted in his saddle. "Jake, Marshal from Prescott's already asking about us in every town," he said. "We drop her here, drop him too. We'll have the whole territory chasing our dust. This is not worth it." Jake's pale eyes locked on Annie. For a long, heavy moment, the heat, the land, the sky, everything felt like it was holding its breath with them. "This isn't finished," he said finally. "You talk to the law, you hang us with that tongue of yours. I'll remember your face." "Good," Annie answered. "Then you'll remember the woman you left in the dirt who walked away anyway." His jaw clenched. He jerked his reins hard. "We ride!" he snapped. The 3 of them wheeled and thundered back toward the broken hills, dust boiling behind them until the heat swallowed them whole. Ethan kept his rifle trained on their backs until they were specks, then lowered it at last and rode down toward the house. Annie's strength left her all at once. The rifle slipped from her hands and clattered against the porch. Her knees buckled. Ethan swung down from the saddle and caught her before she slid off the step. "I missed," she whispered. "I meant to hit him. I missed." "You stood," he said. "You faced them when you could have hidden. You made them ride away. Out here, that's what winning is." He eased her back against the post and took his place beside her, one arm behind her shoulders until her shaking slowed. Her shoulder throbbed like a drum. Her hands still trembled, but under the fear, a hot, solid feeling glowed. They had come to finish her. They had left instead. More hoofbeats echoed on the trail. 4 this time, steady and even. Annie tensed again, but Ethan's hand stayed light on her arm. "Different rhythm," he said. "Lawmen." 4 riders came into view, dust trailing behind them. Brass stars glinted on their vests. The lead rider was older, with iron gray hair and a tired, sharp gaze. He reined in, taking in the churned dirt, the broken hat brim, the rifle on the porch, Annie's bruised shoulder, Ethan at her side. "Marshal Turner," he said. "Out of Prescott. We're looking for Jake Morrison and Wes Carver. Heard they took a liking to this stretch of country." "You heard right," Ethan said. "They were just here. She's the one they wanted to put in the ground." Turner's attention fixed on Annie. "You the survivor from that North Road stage?" "Yes, sir," she said. Her voice was soft, but it did not shake. "Can you describe them?" he asked. "Swear to it in front of a judge?" Annie saw blue eyes above a bandana, a scar through a brow, a young man chewing his lip while horses screamed. She saw the driver fall, the coach burn, the endless road, this porch. "I can," she said. "They killed everyone on that stage and left me to die. Today they tried again. I'm done keeping quiet for men like that." Turner gave a short nod. "That's enough for me. We'll smoke them out of whatever hole they choose and drag them to court. When it's time, we'll send for you." When the lawmen rode on, the yard felt bigger, like some tight band around the house had finally snapped. The danger wasn't gone, but it wasn't pressed against her throat anymore. Ethan sat with her while the sun slid lower, turning the desert copper and gold. "You still think Brennan's store is the only road you've got?" he asked quietly. Annie looked at the little adobe house, the corral, the faint trail toward town. She thought of the empty schoolhouse in Pine Ridge, of children who needed letters and sums more than they needed another shopkeeper's wife. She thought of the man beside her who had turned his horse toward her twice when most would have ridden faster. "No," she said. "For the first time I see more than one road, and none of them start with belonging to a man who thinks buying a ticket bought my life." "Good," Ethan said. "Tomorrow, if you're strong enough, we'll ride into town. You can tell Brennan yourself. Then you can talk to the council about that school. Whatever happens after that, it'll be because you chose it." "And you?" she asked. "I'll be there," he said, "not to answer for you. Just to stand beside you while you answer for yourself." Annie let out a long breath she felt she'd been holding since the first gunshot on the coach. The same desert that had almost killed her stretched out in front of the porch, wild and merciless, but not empty. Once, she had been freight on someone else's journey. Now she understood something simple and fierce. The road ahead was hers, and this time she was the one holding the reins.